a radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday, October 15th. I hope everybody is having a good weekend and you are finding time to enjoy yourself. Whoops, I haven't put on the video yet. There we go. Camera's on. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. Let me start by just saying thank you to all of you for watching all the videos. I think a lot of the videos have been shared. A lot of the videos have been liked. The videos are getting around. There's a lot of viewership. So thank you for that. I see Nikos' video of his talk. That message was just retracted. It has 85,000 views. That's great that it has that. You know, there's a lot of great content that the Ayn Rand Institute, that I and the Ayn Rand Institute have produced over the years with regard to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with regard to the entire Middle East. Thank you for consuming it, for sharing it, for promoting it, and for getting it out there. Thank you to all the super chatters who have supported this show over the last week, over the last many years, but certainly over the last week, given everything that's going on. And thank you for all the emails and shows of support and everything else that's going on. Subscriptions are up significantly, more so on Twitter, but also on here on YouTube. So thank you to all the new viewers. If you're new here, please consider consuming a lot of my old videos. There's a ton of videos. There's a ton of content on all of these issues, on the Middle East, on 9/11, on the history of the Middle East, on the history of the Islamist movement, Hamas being one of the participants in the Islamist movement, going back to its intellectuals and its leaders of the past. There is a lot of content on past Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, and then, of course, the last week of content. And, of course, that's just foreign policy, but then there's a gazillion shows and just everything else. So please, those of you who are new to the channel, consume. Feel free to consume. There is a lot to consume. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Yeah, I want to remind everybody that this show is one of the sponsors of the show, in addition to ExpressVPN, and you can go expressvpn.com/Yaron and get 3 months extra free of ExpressVPN. So that's one sponsor. The second sponsor is the Ayn Rand Institute, and they want to remind you that the Institute has had a variety of different commentary on the current situation in Israel. Anka and Ilan have talked about Hamas's war in Israel, and they've talked about applying Ayn Rand's ideas to this situation. You can find those podcasts, you can find those videos by visiting aynrand.org/start here. You'll also see a bunch of other stuff like getting free copies of Atlas Shrugged or getting involved in Ayn Rand University and everything else. So please aynrand.org/start here. The more you guys go to that web page, the more the Institute will consider sponsorship of this show worthwhile. So consider doing that to help promote the show. Anything else? Logistics we need to wrap up? No, I think we're pretty good. Oh yeah, last thing, of course, is to wish Leonard Peikoff a happy birthday. Today, October 15th, 2023 is Leonard Peikoff's 90th birthday. That is quite an achievement to reach 90, so that's exciting and thrilling for him. I'm actually going to be heading down for a birthday party at his home. Really why I came out to California. One of the main reasons I came to California was to be at the birthday party, so that'll be today at, I think it starts at 4 West Coast time. It'll be fun because I'll also be seeing a lot of good friends I haven't seen in a long time, but the main thing is to celebrate 90 years of Leonard Peikoff's life. So thumbs up and congratulations to Leonard, who I know has had massive, massive influence on my life and on my thinking and my development intellectually. And I know on many of you, Leonard has inspired and changed many of our lives and made them richer and better. So thank you, Leonard Peikoff. All right, great. Let's jump in quickly with an assessment of what's going on right now, and then maybe a kind of a big picture kind of strategy, what I think the strategy is, or where I think well, it is and what I think it should be in terms of the current conflict and how it's evolving. And then I want to do a segment on the Israeli-Palestinian kind of history, and it won't do obviously justice because you'd need like a big book in order to do, but it'll give you an outline, at least give you a sense of what's going on. If Christian is watching this, that section definitely needs to be its own video, right? So the section where I talk about the history should become its own video. All right, as you probably know, because my assumption is some of you are consuming the news, Israel has not yet started its ground offensive. Rumors yesterday or last night, on the West Coast at least, were that they had delayed the ground offensive because of weather. That is not unreasonable at this time of year. There could be a lot of cloud cover in that part of the world. Israel needs to be particularly accurate in terms of air support, and cloud coverage could make a big difference, both for helicopters, but mainly for drones and airplanes. Israel wants optimal conditions, and here I think it's important to understand why. What Israel is about to embark on, if I understand, I think I understand what they're planning to do. This is going to be one of the most complex military operations ever. Certainly the most complex military operation the Israeli army has ever engaged in. And what makes it at least 100 times more complicated and more difficult is whatever they do, it's going to be streamed live on Twitter and on mainstream media and everywhere. And it's not just going to be streamed live, it's going to be streamed and manipulated, it's going to be streamed with commentary, it's going to be selectively edited. Everything they do, every step they take will be broadcast. There's going to be no secrecy here, really. There's going to be very little surprise. This is going to be a war where really everything is going to be right there on CNN in real time. And that makes operations and war, and it makes rules of engagement far more difficult. And let's be clear, Israel is going to be under very, very strict rules of engagement. It's going to be very, very cautious in terms of killing civilians. Civilians will die, but that's in spite of Israel's efforts, not because of Israel's efforts. And anybody who says otherwise is just lying and evading. As I've said many times, the rules of engagement, just like the military, just like the U.S. military, are super strict and ridiculous. They're suicidal in my view, and they're immoral. But they are what they are. And given that the world is watching everything, as Rob says, especially on Telegram is where the real gruesome videos go. Israel is going to, be careful not to give bad PR to the bad guy, or good PR to the bad guys. And it's tragic and sad that is the situation, that is the case, that Israel has to do that. But that is the reality. And I don't think Israel has any choice but to take that into consideration. Well, I do think they have a choice, but given their own philosophy, given their own moral case, I don't see what alternative they have. Anyway, so ground operations will begin any hour now, any day now. As I've said before, every day that Israel waits it's a day that makes this operation more difficult, not more easy. On the other hand, they're trying to integrate 360,000 reserve soldiers into this operation. Now, many of those soldiers are not based in Gaza, Many of those soldiers have gone north to Lebanon and Syria. We'll get to that in a minute. So they are training them, they are strategizing. So I understand the need for time, but a lot of this is, but again, the longer they wait, the more difficult this will be. They've also extended this to allow the Palestinians to evacuate the northern Gaza to go south. They've also announced, you go figure this out, but they've announced that in order to provide a greater incentive for those in the north to go south, they are providing water in the south. That is, Israel will start pumping water from Israel into the Gaza Strip in the south, but not in the north, in order to provide incentive for those in the north to go south. The problem is, and there's a ton of evidence of this, that Hamas is not permitting those in the north to go to the south. Hamas is taking people's cars, destroying people's cars. They are blockading the streets. They're telling people that they are traitors if they go south. And basically, as I've said yesterday, Hamas wants as many innocents, as many civilian casualties as possible for its propaganda. And the fact that these civilian casualties are Palestinian, Hamas doesn't care. It's all for the greater good. It's all for a great cause. It's all for Allah and for Palestinians, something or other. So, I mean, this is just, I think this is, it's really, really, really important to understand this and to understand the extent of the evil that Hamas represents. It's not like they care one iota about the lives of their own people. It's not like they're freedom fighters. It's not like they're liberators. They want free, they don't care about the lives of their own people. All they care about is destruction of Israel, killing Israeli as many as possible, and to garner as much international support and to play off of the West's altruism and the West's appeasement as much as possible to attain the goal. So that's Gaza. We'll wait and see what happens. In the meantime, and this is unbelievable to me, that Israel is allowing this, but it is happening. And this is, again, the delay of the ground offensive. This morning, massive rocket attacks on Tel Aviv, on central Israel. These rocket attacks did not cause a lot of casualties because of Israel's Iron Dome and because people are protected in air raid shelters. But it is just horrific, the idea that people have to live with the constant idea that missiles are raining on them and falling from the sky, and that Israel has not yet done enough, whether from the air or with drones or whatever, to destroy Hamas's capability to do this. Again, this continues to be a massive intelligence failure. It continues to be a failure of Israelis to be willing to actually bomb as much of the Gaza as needs to be bombed in order to prevent aggressive actions of Hamas against Israel. And I know that everybody's going to jump up and down, oh, but civilians will die. Yes, civilians are going to die. Many, many thousands of civilians are probably going to die. That is the reality. That is the reality Hamas has created. That is the reality those who initiated force have created. And Israel needs to get on with it. And they need to get on with it quickly. And every day that they allow more missiles to be launched in Israel is another day where they look and present and are weak, and it's another day for Hamas propaganda. I mean, right now, there are accounts on Twitter and elsewhere and all over the place claiming that there was no massacre. Children were not killed, women were not raped. It goes against the rules of Islam to do stuff like that. And civilians were not killed. All of that is videos produced by the Israelis in order to fool the world. It is all a lie, a myth. Literally, that is being argued out there. And there are Americans, libertarians, right-wingers, new right types, who are picking up on this and using this. No, this is all a Netanyahu scheme to take on Hamas, to get re-election, to unite the country. This is all being orchestrated by the Mossad, because this is the kind of stuff you have to go up against, and you have to understand that anybody who's trying to do this, anybody is trying to do this, is supporting, and by supporting, becoming evil. Right. And again, if you're interested in my arguments about civilian casualties, I encourage you to read my Just War Theory article. Israel should be defending itself and not putting its own citizens in harm's way, and they should stop worrying about civilian casualties on the other side. They have done everything they can. Enough is enough. It's time to put the interests of Israel first, and to stop buying into the sacrificial altruistic stuff. And yes, I know the left is worse than the right, but you want me to align with the right. You don't want me to align with the left. I'm just trying to show you why an alliance with the right would be evil, not just bad, evil. Because, if there are people like this on the right, who the hell wants to align with them? Nobody has ever argued about objectivism aligning with the left. So you need me to criticize the left? Just go watch Fox. They do a very good job at it. Good for them. But watch those libertarian accounts and watch those new right accounts. And those people should be shunned, evicted. They should be, none of us, anybody sane should have anything to do with it. Anything to do with them. I have no problem in aligning with the better parts of the liberty movement. All right, let me see. Okay, two other developments that I want to highlight, and we'll get quickly into strategy. One is there are constant incursions on the northern front, Hezbollah, where it's elements of Hamas, but nothing happens in the north without Hezbollah's being permitting. There are regular shootings. At least one Israeli has been killed. I think a number of soldiers have been injured, maybe more being killed. There's constant fighting on the north on a low scale. I have said when this started that Israel needs to preemptively take on Hezbollah and destroy it. What's happening in the north is not helping Israel, it is hurting. It is a distraction. It's allowing Hezbollah to have the strategic advantage by giving them the option of intervening, not intervening, when to intervene a little bit, intervene a lot. Israel needs to take the strategic initiative. I'll get to that in a minute. And the same is true in Syria. A number of rockets have been launched from Syria into Israel. They were intercepted. But again, there are elements of the Iranian National Guard in Syria. More Iranians are moving into Syria. Iranians in bases in the east of Syria are moving west towards the border with Israel. Iran definitely wants to distract Israel. Whether it wants to actually get involved in the fighting, I don't know. But at the very least, what they're succeeding in doing, is distracting Israel by putting troops on Israel's border with Syria. And the Russians, of course, are allowing this. The Russians control Syria. They decide who moves where and what happens. So the Russians are allowing this. And this is a distraction. Again, Israel needs to take the strategic initiative. Okay, so let's talk about strategy. Israel is going to try to avoid a 2 or 3 front war right now. They're going to try to deal with Hezbollah and with any Iranian threat kind of at a low level. Israel attacked the airfields of Damascus and Aleppo. I think it was Aleppo. Anyway, airfields that Iranians could use to bring in troops and to bring in weapon systems. They created those airfields. They should have made them completely inoperable by taking out the control towers and everything else. But again, Israel is playing, being weak and being not going all out. They're trying to keep everything on a low flame. And the idea is here, we just want to keep them away. We're in a posture to react, but we're not going to take the initiative, and we just want to keep them away. Let's see. Israel is committed now to a ground offensive in the north of Gaza, and they're 500 kilometers. 500 kilometers. What, 350 miles of tunnels underneath Gaza. That's why I say this is going to be so difficult, so horrific. Hamas can move around in those tunnels, can move from place to place. Israel is trying to get bunker-busting bombs so they can take out those tunnels. They're waiting for as many of the civilians to evacuate North Gaza as possible in order to start on that. But then they're going to have to move in, and they're going to have to try to go into those tunnels. They're also going to try to save as many of the hostages as possible. That is going to require going into those tunnels. Special forces units will be doing that kind of work, and it is going to be bloody, and it's going to be, Israel's going to take a lot of casualties, and it's going to be unbelievably difficult. So strategically, the aim right now is to go into North Gaza and dismantle everything related to Hamas in the north. Destroy all the tunnels, find all of them, destroy all of them, destroy any ammunitions, and find and kill any Hamas fighters that remain in the north. Of course, they are probably, some of them evacuating, some of them are laying booby traps for the Israelis right now. And remember, this means that Israel is going to, Israeli troops, tanks, armored personnel carriers is going to move into heavily built up areas. There'll be snipers everywhere. There will be mines. There will be anti-tank missiles. There will be every trick, every barrier, every kind of booby trap conceivable will be placed in those roads. And believe me, the Hamas will not worry about whether some Palestinian kid might trip over these and blow himself up. They don't care about the lives of their own children. They don't care about the lives of their own population. They have never cared. Again, they are doing this for Allah, and in Allah's service, everything is on the table. What else do I want to say about this? So this, again, after they take the north of Gaza, I don't know what they do then. It's not clear what they do with the population now that's in the south. Do they ask them to evacuate north into where Israel is occupying? Do they ask the Egyptians to take them? But in order to actually get Hamas, they're going to have to go to the south of Gaza. They're going to have to take over the entire section, right? This is 25 miles long. It's 3 to 6 miles wide. That's it. That's the entire Gaza Strip. It's tiny. But it's going to be house to house, street to street, tunnel by tunnel. Most of those tunnels, I think they'll just destroy, but partially they're going to do what they can to figure out if there are hostages in the tunnels before they destroy them. Very, very difficult operation. And again, they're going to try to hold back on the north and on the in the northeast, Syria and Lebanon. What I would do is a lot more ruthless and a lot more brutal. I would be much more ruthless in the bombing right now and the destruction of the tunnels from the air. I would rely less on the ground operation, which has to come, but I would soften the ground much more before that by using much more artillery and air support and just flattening as much of Gaza, of northern Gaza as possible before entering. But again, they are playing to an international crowd, and they are being particularly cautious of not upsetting the altruists all over the world. I would preempt in Lebanon. I would take out as much of Hezbollah's capabilities as possible before Hezbollah takes the initiative, and I would do whatever I can, and I think Israel can do a lot, basically to demolish whatever troops, and this all can be done from the air, or mostly can be done for the air, to demolish Iranian capabilities in Syria. I mean, they've been doing it for years now, bombing Iranians in Syria. They need now a systematic campaign over the next few days to take out every single asset Syria has, Iran has in Syria, and not worry about who else is being hurt. I think that the worry is not to piss off the Russians. At this point, to hell with the Russians. Russians not going to get involved, particularly. I think that's why the Sixth Fleet or the America has 2 aircraft carriers off the coast of Israel. It's to make sure Russia doesn't get involved. So go in there and wipe out the Iranian presence and knock down any plane coming from Iran into Syria. I don't understand how Israel allows the foreign minister of Iran to just travel around Lebanon and Syria and to strategize with enemies about what the next move is. Those airplanes, it should be clear to the world. An airplane taking off from Iran, heading towards Syria or Lebanon, will be shot down. Just keep civilians off those airplanes. This is war, and it's a regional war. This is not war with Hamas. This is a war with Iran, and Israel doesn't have the resources right now to go and take Iran, take on the regime in Iran. Armin is here. Thank you, Armin. Really, really appreciate your support. But the regime in Iran needs to fall as a consequence of all of this, and that will help the Iranians enormously. But Israel does not have the capacity to take on Iran while doing everything else. But it should make clear that Iranian troops, Iranian militias will not be tolerated west of Iraq. They can go to Iraq all they want. Once they cross over to Syria or Jordan or anywhere, they will be destroyed by Israel, whether it's drones or airplanes, whatever Israel has to do. It will destroy them. And, let the Russians consider shooting down an Israeli plane and see what the consequences of that will be to the marketability of their ground-to-air missiles in the future. Because I think they will find that they will fail. It's one of the reasons they've never deployed them in Syria. It's because they're afraid that Israel has the capacity to make them ineffective. Okay, so that's kind of a catch-up strategy. I never have expected, it's never happened in the past, I don't expect it to happen in the future. I do not expect anybody, Israel or anybody else, to follow my strategic military advice. They never do, and it's not likely that it's going to start now. It's sad, I think, because if they had after 9/11, we wouldn't be in the position we are right now. If they had in the various wars with the Gaza Strip in the past, we wouldn't be in the position we are today. If they had, going back to the 1982 Lebanon War, they wouldn't be in the position that they are today. But my fate in life is to ultimately not be listened to by the decision makers. But that's okay. What we're doing this for is the very long run, and I am inspired by the support I'm getting from you guys and by how many people are joining this channel, how many people are following us as a consequence of the strong moral stand that I and the Iranian Institute is taking. And I'm happy for Nikos that his video is doing so well on the Israeli. These are the ideas that I've been promoting for a long, long, long time, and I'm glad to see. And Leonard Peikoff has been promoting for a long, long time, and Commodities has been promoting for a long, long time, and I'm glad to see them being picked up by other intellectuals and having massive success out there in terms of numbers and views and so on. Hopefully, one day all that will translate into actual influence on decision makers in the world. All right, quickly, here's some strategic questions that I'll quickly answer. What could a long-lasting solution look like? If you were prime minister for the next decade, what would you do? Again, I would devastate Iran. I would devastate Lebanon. I would try to get Lebanese civilians out of southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River, and I would devastate everything between the Israeli border and the Litani River. You've got to get rid of the Hezbollah threat. I would do everything in my power to assassinate the spiritual leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, who is in Lebanon, and the entire Hezbollah leadership. They need to die. They need to die, and they need to stop being an element, a force for evil and in the world and a threat to Israel. Iran needs to be stopped. So the strategic goal needs to be to eliminate the Iranian threat. Whether Israel can do that on its own or whether it's going to need American help, but Iran's nuclear capacity is going to have to be crushed. Its ability to produce revenue, money, needs to be crushed. That means the oil terminals on the Persian Gulf need to be destroyed so Iran cannot export any oil. And its leadership, its religious, fanatical leadership needs to be overturned, whether that is from the outside by eliminating the government offices and government positions, and government buildings in Tehran or elsewhere in Iran, or whether that is through the fermentation of a revolution within Iran. I think the second would be a better thing, but the Iranian mullahs need to go. So the long-term strategy has to be the elimination of Iran as a threat in the Middle East. And I think Iran, Israel, and the United States have a strategic interest in seeing this happen. If that happens, Syria changes. If that happens, Iraq changes. The number one villain in the Middle East right now is the Iranian regime. And until that regime, as long as that regime is still around, the worst elements. I mean, you saw Saudi Arabia wants peace with Israel, kind of. A lot of other countries want peace with Israel. Iran is what's stopping the rest of the Middle East from at least succumbing to some kind of deal with the Israelis. So I hope that out of this comes a long-term strategy to completely eviscerate the regime, basically to see regime change in Iran. How that happens, I don't care. And ideally, it happens through internal revolutions. Ideally, it happens by Iranians deposing their own corrupt and horrific leadership. So let's see. Instead of giving Iran money, instead of doing prison exchanges with Iran, the United States should increase pressure on Iran and should resolve the nuclear issue with Iran simply by bombing every single facility in Iran that has any chance, any small probability, any tiny likelihood of producing nuclear material that can be used for a bomb. So, that is the core, the key, and that is the most strategic goal ultimately in terms of Hamas and in terms of the West Bank and Gaza. I really don't think long term that a one-state solution is feasible. I think that Israel needs to go into the West Bank and goes to Gaza and basically, take away all their weapons and basically pacify. The first thing that has to happen is both areas need to be completely pacified. They need to be placed under, a military regime, military authority that does not allow any use of weapons, that restricts to the extent that they restricts movements, it restricts freedoms to the extent that is necessary in order to pacify the area. After that, I think Israel needs to go through a long, slow process of figuring out how to deal with, these 3 to 4 million Palestinians, whether that means some kind of formation of a Palestinian state, although I've never thought that was a reasonable solution given how small, whether it's to pay them to leave Israel. Some of them might be willing to be paid to go to Jordan or to go elsewhere. Maybe a whole regional deal can be made to resettle some of the Palestinians in some places. And then those who remain to integrate them into Israeli society. Now, this is not a 10-year process. It's probably a 20-year process. It's at least one generation. And over that generation, Israel has to be committed to a free, liberal in the classical liberal sense, country that provides equal rights to its citizens, but that is committed to integrating everybody who lives in this territory into Israel. The alternative is for Egypt to take over Gaza. That is highly unlikely. that Egypt will agree. I think Israel would hand them over Gaza tomorrow if they'd agreed to do it. Or again, potentially to resettle some of the Palestinians in Gaza, in Gaza for maybe they can resettle some of the Palestinians in Gaza in the Sinai Desert or in other areas in Egypt. Again, I doubt Israel wants that. I doubt Egypt wants that headache. But that needs to be strategic goal. That within 20 years, the Palestinian issue is resolved, finished, resolved. There's either some kind of small Palestinian state in which they live peacefully, or they have been somehow integrated into Israeli society, those of them who are left. All right, let's see. Wouldn't the complete takeover of the territories mean a conflict with Russia and other countries that would result in a bigger threat to Israel? No, I don't think so. I don't think if Russia is interested in a conflict with Israel. Russia has its hands full right now in Ukraine. Russia is not capable and does not have the military capabilities to fight two wars, certainly not with an advanced country. Now, again, if Russia wants to use nukes, that would put them in direct conflict with the United States. I do think the United States is committed to keeping Israel, safe from nukes. But remember, Israel has nukes. Israel would not just accept. Israel also has missile defense systems. Israel is just not going to roll over to a Russian threat. It does not want a war with Russia. We don't want it. But why would Russia intervene in a war over the Palestinians? I mean, what Russia might do is it might stop the Iranians from engaging and participating out of fear that Israel will get involved in Syria and weaken a Russian ally. But Russia is much more likely to turn on the Iranians than it is to start a war with Israel. There's just zero incentive for it to do that. Same with China. There's just no incentive for these countries to get engaged in this conflict in a serious way. As it is, I think the response of Russia to this conflict has increased the probability of military aid from Israel going to Ukraine after this conflict is over, which would make Ukraine much stronger, much more powerful. Imagine an Iron Dome-like technologies in Ukraine, other anti-missile technologies. I think that's much more likely after the way Russia has responded to what has happened. So no, I don't think Russia has any incentives. There's just, and now you never know with Putin, granted, but I don't think it's going to happen. And again, I think the strong positioning of the U.S. military in the Eastern Mediterranean, I give Biden credit for doing that. I'm not sure at all that Trump would have done that. Is a strong signal to the Russians to stay out of this. Should Israel go to war with Iran? What about the risk it will bring about? Should Israel bomb targets in Qatar? What would the response be like in the West and the Arab world? I think Israel should go to war with Iran. I think Israel is at war with Iran. We just don't want to admit it. It's the same as the United States has been at war with Iran. We just haven't wanted to admit it for since 1979. But I think Israel should find a way to get the United States engaged with it in that war with Iran, a war which the United States seems to try to avoid at all costs since 1979. But it needs to do it, it needs to finish it, it needs to engage it. The Iranians have been at war with us for that long. But Israel is at war with Iran. It needs to recognize that, and it needs to do whatever it can to destroy Iran's capabilities to be at war with Israel. And again, I think this is the time to get Western, particularly American support for that and help for that, particularly from the air and particularly just let them Israel use the airspace. Should Israel bomb targets in Qatar? I don't think directly. I don't think it should send airplanes to bomb. But I think it should figure out where the Hamas leadership is staying in Qatar, is living in Qatar, and they should eliminate them. That could be with an airstrike. It could be with a plant of a bomb. It could be just assassination. But the idea that these Hamas leaders are living it up in, by the way, there was a tweet issued by the Four Seasons hotel chain saying that they guarantee that the Hamas leadership is not staying at a Four Seasons hotel. I guess they're worried about a bomb in their hotel. You know, they need to minimize collateral damage here, but it has to be clear that the people, that the Hamas leadership in Qatar is a legitimate target, will be killed. They should let the Qataris know, we're coming. We're coming. The Americans won't like this because America has this joint defense agreement with Qatar, and it has its big bases in Qatar. It's invested gazillions of dollars in Qatar. The United States should leave Qatar. It should have left Qatar a long, long time ago. Qatar was funding ISIS as the U.S. was launching missions against ISIS from Qatari airfields. The hypocrisy, just the horror of what America is doing in the Middle East is unthinkable. It's for another time. But the United States needs to leave Qatar tomorrow, yesterday. Forget the billions you've invested in there. Get everything out of there. Move it to Saudi Arabia, move it to Dubai, move it to Israel. But get it out of Qatar. Qatar is an enemy. It's not a friend. Qatar is a sponsor of terrorism. Qatar is an ally of Iran. Qatar funded ISIS, funded Al-Qaeda, and is funding Hamas, and is harboring Hamas criminals. So America needs to stop playing this stupid game with the Qataris. It is ridiculous. And again, this is not me saying something new. I've been saying this since basically 9/11, or as soon as the realization of what was going on in Qatar became evident to me. What are the long-term scenarios if Israel takes the path that you're recommending? Peace. Peace. I mean, that's the thing. You know, that's the thing about peace from strength. You cannot attain peace. Peace will not come until the Iranian regime is destroyed. Peace will not come until the Palestinians have recognized, admitted, internalized, are completely conscious of the fact that they've lost, that their cause has no possibility, no success. Peace can only come from victory. Israeli victory over the Arab world does not require World War III. It does not require nuclear weapons. It just requires Israel to do what is necessary to win. But you can't get peace without victory. Again, I've been saying that since 9/11. You want peace in the Middle East? Make it clear that Israel cannot lose, that America will not lose. All right, I've gone on too long, so let's do quickly. This Israeli-Palestinian. This is a very brief history. Granted, we can talk about this some more. You can ask questions about this. We can talk about it in the future, but we've got somewhat limited time today. So let me go through the highlights of the Israeli-Palestinian history in conflict and what exactly happened. Starting in the late 19th century, small numbers of Jews in Europe, primarily Eastern Europe to begin with, as a consequence of the pogroms in Russia and Ukraine and other parts of Eastern Europe, Jews in Eastern Europe were looking for an out, and a certain number of them, primarily Jews who were socialist and tended to be on the left, chose to start emigrating to Palestine. Palestine at the time was occupied by the Turks. Let's be very clear here. There's never been a Palestine. The area that is today Israel was part of the Roman Empire. It then became part of the Byzantine Empire. It was occupied by the Byzantine. It was dominated by Christians during this period. Almost all the wealthy families in this region in the Middle East became Christian as a consequence of Rome's, Constantine's conversion to Christianity, Rome's embrace of Christianity as its national religion, and then most of them converted to Islam when Muslim conquered this area and took it over. Started in the the 7th century, and since then it has been dominated by a variety of different Islamic empires, where the parts of Israel, what today is Israel, were occupied by the Egyptians. There were periods in which it was occupied by the first Islamic empire was based in Damascus, I think, and they ruled. And then the next Islamic empire was based in Iraq. After that, the Islamic empires were fragmented. But starting in I think the 16th century, basically the Turks who had emigrated into this area and occupied, talk about occupation, talk about colonization. I wonder why the anti-colonials don't attack Turkey for colonizing the Asia Minor, for colonizing the area that is Turkey. I mean, it was basically a Turkish tribe. Turkish tribe means a tribe from Central Asia, not far from where Mongolia is, where Turkmenistan is today. That's where the Turks are still dominant, in Turkmenistan. So the Turks moved into this area, dominated this area, and ultimately created the Ottoman Empire. And again, think about that. Think about the fact that the real colonizers of the Middle East were the Turks, and nobody talks about Turkey as a colonizing power, a colonizing entity. Why? Because it happened 600 years ago. Is it a matter of when you colonized? If you colonized in the distant past, it's okay, but in modern past, it's not okay. When do you recognize native populations? When do you discard them? When does everybody become part of the colony? It's all irrational. The whole anti-colonial movement is an irrational movement that can't define itself, right? Anyway, and I'm starting way earlier than I intended to, but the reality is that in the 19th century, for hundreds of years, the territory that is Israel today was a part of the Ottoman Empire, and the part that is Israel today was always part of an empire. The last state that existed in this area was a Jewish state that had rebelled against the Roman Empire and survived until the Romans crushed it in, I think it's 70 AD, destroyed the Jewish temple, and basically took all the Jews who lived in this area and spread them around the Roman Empire. This is part of how Rome diffused local ethnic challenges, as they took those ethnic communities and separated them from their land and diffused them all over the empire, thus not allowing them to coalesce around an opposition and a rebellion. So the last state that existed in what is today Israel was a Jewish state. That resulted from the rebellion against the Romans, and that rebellion was crushed in 70 AD. From 70 AD until, and the Jews were not asked to leave; they were forced to leave. If you go to the Arc de Triomphe, which the triumphal arc, the Roman arc, where they have there are arcs like this where they've edged the story, you can see Jewish slaves, Jewish captives being brought to Rome after the rebellion was crushed in 70 AD. And look, that was Rome. So that territory was occupied by empires. There was no state. So there is no such thing as an ancient Palestinian state. There is no such thing as an ancient Arab state. There were never any Arab states. They were always, throughout history, parts of various empires. And that's a reality in much of Europe. A lot of the states that exist in Europe, there were no such states historically. They were always parts of empires. Anyway, Israel in the 19th century was sparsely populated. There were a lot of swamps. Half of Israel to this day is desert. And it was not very habitable. It was not great land because of the swamps, because of the heat, the humidity. The coast where Tel Aviv is today was just sand. It was very difficult. You couldn't grow anything on it, and nobody built anything on it. There was Jaffa was a city. There was Akko, a city. There was a small settlement in Haifa. There was a settlement in Haifa, an Arab settlement in Haifa. And inland, Jerusalem and others, there were larger Arab settlements. But basically, the place was very sparsely populated. So in the late 19th century, when Jews decided they had to leave Europe, some of them went to America, and some of them my ancestors went to South Africa, although at least two of my ancestors went to South Africa through what was then Palestine. Jews started emigrating with the Ottoman Empire's permission, because they had to get permission, emigrating into Palestine. And the only way they could emigrate into Palestine was by buying land, settling that land, cultivating that land, starting to build small industry and starting to build up the land in small. The first kibbutzim were established during this period of time. But this is a period of time where small groups of Jews are starting to enter. And already some of the Arab population embraced this, but some of the Arab population was resisting this, and there were some cases of violence, and there was a lot of political angst. And there were various pressures being brought on the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul about whether to allow the Jews in or not. But generally, the Jews were bringing money, they were buying land, they were cultivating swamps, they were building stuff up. Ottomans were not objecting because this was profitable for everybody involved. In 1897, the first Zionist Congress was held. This was a Congress of Jews in Europe committed to establishing a Jewish state. Some of the people there, including the leader of the Zionist movement, Theodor Herzl, were committed to establishing a Jewish state wherever that might be, and he actually accepted a British offer to do it in Uganda, but the rest of the Congress voted it down. So they basically committed to establishing a Jewish state in Palestine, which was, again, relatively lightly populated. And, so that was in 1897. They lobbied the Ottomans, they lobbied the British to try to find solutions. During World War I, it became the Ottoman Empire, for those of you who don't know, the Ottoman Empire sided with the Axis powers, with basically Germany. And as a consequence, it became an enemy of the British, an enemy of the United States. And the British, as part of World War I, which was not only fought in Europe, but it was also fought in the Middle East, basically the British conquered all of the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. They ultimately occupied Turkey. They took over Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and if you've watched Lawrence of Arabia, you know some of this. And they occupied all this territory, and they were in constant negotiations with the different families, the different tribes, the different elements. By the way, the French were also there, so the French occupied Lebanon and parts of and much of Syria. So this was kind of an allied occupation. But it was a consequence of a war where Turkey had sided, the Ottoman Empire had sided with the particular elements. Again, people talk about, the British occupied it, they were colonizing it. No, I mean, they fought a war you could argue was started by the Axis. Turkey made a wrong call by backing the losing side, and its empire got occupied by the British. But the Turks were occupiers to begin with. They were an empire, and the British now had an empire. So the UK, the British occupied this without any intent to stay there. Ultimately, they left the Middle East completely. And again, if you take my course on the history of the Middle East, you will get a lot more detail on all of this. They gave up Iraq and Syria, and they drew up maps, and they handed different pieces of the Middle East to different families, and that's why the Saud family got Saudi Arabia, and the Hussein family got Jordan, and other parts of that family got Iraq, Syria, and then that didn't work, so they moved them to Iraq, and in the end that didn't work either. But the British just divvied up the Middle East into different families, different tribes, different peoples, and they created modern national entities, which never existed. There was never Saudi Arabia, not really. There was certainly never a Jordan or an Iraq or Syria or Lebanon, as the British were divvying it up. And in 1917, the British declared that when they fully occupied the Middle East, they would actually allow the Jews to form a state in what is today Israel and Jordan. Over the years afterwards, as British occupied this territory, they said, well, that's a lot of space, and there were a lot of Arabs here. They eliminated Jordan from it, and then they said, well, maybe we need to have two states here because there are Palestinians here. When the British took over from the Ottomans, more Jewish immigrants continued to come in, and there were waves of Jewish immigrants. At some point, the British became weary of this and made it very difficult for Jews to come in to Palestine. When the Nazis came to power, Jews who were trying to escape the Nazis could no longer go to the United States. The United States, starting in the 1920s, early 20s, was blocked to Jewish immigration or to immigration generally into the United States. So many of them tried to come to Palestine. As part of this, the Jews created the city of Tel Aviv. On those sand dunes, they created Tel Aviv. And now they were really starting to build factories, utility companies. They were drying vast quantities of swamps. They were going into the desert and actually figuring out how to cultivate the desert. They built up a real civilization. In the 1930s in Israel, there was a Palestinian, what was called the Orchestra of Palestine, which was an orchestra in Tel Aviv, which had some of the best musicians in the world, people who were escaping the Nazis from Europe and coming to British-occupied Palestine and created an orchestra. They created civilization. They respected property rights. They bought up property. I mean, the British wouldn't let them just steal property. They bought property. The Rothschilds from Europe, the rich Jewish banker family, spent a lot of money buying land in Israel and giving it to settlers, allowing kibbutzim and other kind of settlements to be formed. Jews settled, created Tel Aviv. There was nothing in Tel Aviv, zero, it was just sand. But they also settled in Jerusalem, settled in the south in the desert. They settled in Haifa. They settled in Galilee. They settled all over around the Sea of Galilee. They settled all over this river, and everywhere they went, and they built, they created, they made. They were productive. As a consequence, the economy of this part of the world thrived during this period. And as a consequence of that, there were a lot of jobs available. And as a consequence of that, many Arabs from Lebanon, from Syria, from Jordan, even from Egypt, and maybe from even further away, moved into Palestine. A lot of the Palestinians who today call themselves Palestinians, now I don't really care about this, but a few generations back were immigrants into this place, which is cool. I'm all for that. I have no problem with it. But it's just historically important to note that the Jews came in and didn't steal people's property. Both the Ottomans and the British required them to buy property if they were going to live somewhere, or they took over pieces of property that were not being used. They were not owned by anybody. This is, reality nobody out there wants to actually acknowledge. Jews were the productive element here. Now, I'm not saying the Arabs were not. Some Arabs were. Some were not. But many of the Arabs came in and became laborers in the factories, in the fields, small business owners, contractors, because of the economic activity in Israel, drew them in. Throughout this period, under the British mandate, so Britain was granted a mandate by the League of Nations and then the United Nations to occupy this territory in the Middle East and ultimately to hand it over to the people living there. And during this entire period, the English were first committed to a Jewish state. Then they said, well, they need to be two states. But ultimately, so during this period, at the same time, there was real growing conflict. The Arabs started attacking Jews. They did so in the teens, in the 20s, in the 30s. They objected to Jewish migration coming in. They objected to all this economic activity created by the Jews. They objected by the dominance, if you will, of Jews in this area and their expansion and their success and their progress. And they fought it. They stepped in and they used violence to fight it. And the Jews defended themselves. During this period, in Israel, 3 military organizations, you might even argue one of them or 2 of them were terrorist organizations, were founded, both to protect Jews because they felt like the English were not protecting them, to protect Jews against the Arabs, and then to drive the British out. So there was a huge emphasis starting certainly in the late 30s and then in the 40s, particularly with what was going on in Europe and the Nazis and the Holocaust, with getting the British out of this so that the Jewish population can form a state. And the intent originally was to form one state with Jews and Arabs all there. But obviously, the British didn't believe this was tenable. And ultimately, the British took it to the United Nations and said, you solve this problem. In, I think, November 1947, the United Nations met, the Security Council of the United Nations met, right? And they decided a two-state solution was the answer. Jordan was already a state, and now the idea was to split Israel into two states, a Palestinian state, an Arab state, and a Jewish state. The Jewish state was kind of split into three with tiny little corridors connecting it. It was not a particularly viable solution. It was going to mean big population moves. Some Arabs would have to move from the Jewish state to an Arab state. Some Jews would have to move from the Arab state to the Jewish state if you wanted to do ethnic cleansing, which I think the UN expected would happen. But the reality of the situation was that in 1947, in November 1947, the people running, all the Jewish organizations and the population more broadly accepted that. They said, yes, we'll take it. We'll take whatever you can give us. We've been waiting for, in a sense, a Jewish state for 2,000 years. We'll take what you give us. And they accepted, and literally, you can see photos of this dancing in the street the next day. The Arab countries and the Arab Palestinian population in the area said absolutely not. There will never be a Jewish state in this area. We will kill them. We will drive them to sea. We will slaughter every single one of them. And that's explicitly what they said. Again, the historical documents are unequivocal. And the next day, fighting began. And fighting continued until May of 1948, when the British basically said, you know what, we can't handle the situation. We're losing people. We can't fulfill what the UN wanted. We can't establish two states here. There is a war going on all around us. We're leaving. We're just leaving. And they did. They left in May of 1948. Israel, on the day the mandate ended, on the day the British left, declared the independence of a Jewish state. That same day, the armies of 7 different Arab countries invaded. Not to establish a Palestinian state. No Arab nation had any intent to establish a Palestinian state. They all wanted a piece of it. Jordan wanted Jerusalem. The Egyptians wanted the Sinai. They wanted the desert areas, which were very strategic to them. They wanted to control the entire Red Sea. The Iraqis just sent troops to kill, just because they wanted the elimination of Jews from the Middle East. The Syrians wanted northern Israel. They wanted the Galilee. The Lebanese wanted a piece of the Galilee. They basically all wanted a piece. Nobody cared about the Palestinians. Israel fought them off. It fought them off and actually expanded its territory from what the UN had promised and established a state in that territory. And really, so this whole thing, from beginning, and I would say to end, was caused by the Palestinians and caused by the Arabs and their unwillingness to accept a Jewish state, an Israeli state, a state that is not Muslim and not Islamic, in the territory that is today Israel. That's it. There was in a sense, an armistice signed in 1949, which did not recognize the existence of the state of Israel between Israel and all those 7 Arab armies. That during the war, during the 1947 and mainly 48, 1948 and 49 war, many Arabs were displaced from their homes. Most of the Arabs, an overwhelming majority of the Arabs who were displaced left because the Arab armies that were invading Israel told them to leave so that they would have no collateral damage, so they could wipe out the Jews and then invite them back in. So many of them left, to Lebanon, to Jordan, to the West Bank, to Gaza. They left. And when the war ended, now, I'm not denying that in some cases, certain Israeli units massacred Arabs. It happened. These things happen in war. I'm not denying that in certain cases, Arabs were, thrown out of their homes. Some usually justifiably because they were in border areas, sometimes unjustifiably. But if you want to measure number of massacres, the number of massacres the Muslims committed against Jews far exceeded any number of massacres that the Jews, again, massacres and, gratuitous violence is never appropriate, never right, never just. But there's no moral high ground that the Arabs have here, even though Israel might have committed certain things that they shouldn't have done. In 1949, the Palestinians were not allowed back. They lost the war. They'd initiated force against the Israelis, and they lost the war, and they were not invited back to their homes. Israel was not going to invite in an element that would be hostile to its very existence. Israel repeatedly vied for peace, whether it's to King Hussein in Jordan or to the king and then Nasser in Egypt. Israel consistently said they wanted to live in peace. The Arabs ignored it. During the 1950s, out of the Gaza Strip and Egypt, these were territories held by Egypt, they continued to be terrorist attacks into Israel. So when in 1956 the French and the British paratroop troops into the Suez Canal, Israel joined in order to eradicate the terrorist threat on its border and occupied the Sinai and went all the way to the Suez Canal. Ultimately, in 1957, it gave back the Sinai and gave back the Gaza Strip under a deal where the Egyptian army would be banned from being in the Sinai, and the terrorist attack stopped. Terrorism continued from all kinds of sources. Ultimately, the Palestinians who, in 1967, the Nasser got rid of the UN in the Sinai Desert and brought in Syrian troops. He amassed them on the Israeli border. Syria started lobbing bombs from the Golan Heights into Israel and amassing troops in the Golan Heights, ready for an invasion. Israel preempted both Egypt and Syria in June of 1967, beginning of the Six-Day War. It begged Jordan not to intervene. Jordan decided to launch its own war against Israel. As a consequence of that war, Israel took the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Desert, and the West Bank over. Not because it wanted to, but because it was forced to, as an act of self-defense. As a consequence of this, it now gained millions of Palestinians who were hostile to its existence. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that between 1967 and 1987, Israel made a number of strategic mistakes that which if not been made, there might have been some way to settle the dispute between Palestinians and Israelis. But it was very difficult for Israel to maneuver because the Palestinians were being ruled not by people living in the West Bank and Gaza, but by Yasser Arafat and a variety of different Soviet-funded and Soviet-backed leftist, primarily leftist, some Islamist, but mainly leftist terrorist organizations all over the world and all over the Middle East that continued to commit terrorist attacks, not so much in Israel, but all over the world. You remember the Munich attacks, the attack against high school kids. I remember this because it was kids a little bit older than me, and I was listening on the radio to every moment of that. The hostage taking of the kids, the murder of those children. Through the 60s and 1970s in Israel, terrorist attack after terrorist attack, hijacking of airplanes, murder of civilians, murder of children, over and over and over and over again. Once in a while, there was a little bit of an uprising in Gaza, and Israel dealt with it militarily. But generally, as I've said before, Palestinians worked inside of Israel. They had freedom of movement inside of Israel. But there was constant pressure, deal. And by the way, quickly, and again, you do this history and you never do it justice, because there's so many details and you have to go into so many details, and I don't know that we have the time, but in 1970, Jordan got fed up with the Palestinian refugees in Jordan. They were creating havoc, they were committing terrorist attacks, they were threatening the Jordanian monarchy, they were threatening the rule of law in Jordan, and Jordan basically launched a war against the Palestinians inside Jordan, and as a consequence of that, they kicked all the Palestinians out of Jordan. See, nobody has wanted these Palestinians. Certainly none of the Arab countries have wanted them. Those Palestinians moved to Lebanon. And they settled primarily in Beirut, but all over Lebanon, in refugee camps around Lebanon. While in Lebanon, these Palestinians fermented and ultimately launched a civil war between Muslims and Christians and Jews inside Lebanon that started in the early 1970s as these refugees were leaving Jordan and moving to Lebanon. Lebanon couldn't kick them out. They didn't have the military force to do it. They were backed by the Shiites, which today have become Hezbollah. And that civil war erupted at the same time. The Palestinian Liberation Army organization was building an army in southern Lebanon. They were recruiting people. They were getting weapons, again, from the Soviet Union, from other Arab countries. And they were literally building an army in the south of Israel. In 1978, I think, Israel invaded southern Lebanon after they had artillery shells. They had been bombarded. The Palestinians, the PLO had kidnapped some Israeli troops. And again, I might get the exact details of this wrong, but after significant harassment, i.e. the initiation of force, by the Palestinians, Israel invaded southern Lebanon and retreated from it. The Palestinians just came right back. And this time they built several times a bigger force, thousands of troops, heavy weapon systems, and at the same time, Syria, in the name of helping to stop the civil war in Lebanon, entered the Bekaa Valley, which is in the southeast of Lebanon, and had troops there. And in 1982, after again border conflicts and missiles and bombs and shelling and the murder of Israelis, Israel decided to invade southern Lebanon to get rid of the PLO. It did. It invaded. It destroyed the capacity to wage war. It occupied all of southern Lebanon all the way to Beirut, and it was about to invade western Beirut and kill Yasser Arafat and the 6,000 remaining troops that he had, when the United States, Ronald Reagan, stepped in and said no, gave Yasser Arafat and his troops safe passage out. Now this turned to be a massive strategic mistake by the United States. Yasser Arafat then stayed the leader of the Palestinian movement from 1982 on, and ultimately Israel negotiated a deal with Yasser Arafat called the Oslo Accords, which brought him back to the West Bank, gave him basically policing power, gave him some semblance of autonomy, and continued to negotiate a deal with him. Those negotiations went from 1993 till 2000 without much resolution. There was a famous meeting in 2000 where Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat negotiated. Barak put a deal on the table that basically gave Yasser Arafat 90% of what he wanted, 92% of the land he wanted, and many of the other things that he wanted. Yasser Arafat said no. Israel said, where's your counter? Yasser Arafat refused to counter, presented no counter offer. The Carter administration tried to negotiate something. Nothing worked. Yasser Arafat went back home after getting 92% of what he wanted, said the Jews must go, they must be eliminated. And that was the launch of the Second Intifada, which lasted like 4 years. Thousands of Israelis killed in the most horrific nature, bombing of buses, bombing of restaurants, indiscriminately, children, civilians, almost all civilians, soldiers were kidnapped and murdered and tortured. Just horror. Alex Sharon was prime minister at that time. He got tough on occasion, but mostly was pretty weak. The Bush administration kept restraining Israel and stopping it from doing what was necessary. But generally, Israel was super weak during this time. By the way, the first Intifada was launched in 1987. It was mainly rock throwing. It wasn't a lot of terrorism. Things really deteriorated. The real deterioration, the real rise in terrorism inside Israel was a consequence of the Oslo Accord. I remember I was on the phone with my parents after the Oslo Accord was signed, and I said, Israel will pay a heavy, heavy, heavy price for what they have just done. You cannot appease evil. You cannot negotiate evil. There is no peace with evil. And sadly, I was right. Sadly, I was right. I wish I'd recorded that phone call because it would have been interesting. They were like, no, it's peace. This is great. Yeah. Yes, in the 90s, it was Bill Clinton, not Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel in 1970. 78, I think. 78 or 9. And that's, since then, there have been several wars in Gaza under Bibi Netanyahu as prime minister that Israel's bombed, gone in a little bit, done nothing. They rearmed themselves. Same thing in Lebanon. There was a big war in 2006. There have been other skirmishes since then. Nothing substantive has been done to eliminate Hamas or Hezbollah. And what we're experiencing today is that. Now, this is not a story about tit for tat. This is not a story about evil occupiers. This is not a story about, well, the Palestinians have something there. This is overwhelmingly a story, and I know this sounds Pollyannish, but this is overwhelmingly a story about Jews coming, settling, civilizing, building, industrializing, creating, making a country, making a state. They made a state. They created a state by building it, by creating, by being productive, and by making it democratic and making it relatively free, relatively right respecting, in the same sense as any government in the West is right respecting. And a population, a native population, that partially is native because they came because of all the economic activity, a native population that is murderous, hostile, resentful, refuses to accept the Jews can live in this place, refuses to accept what they built and what they created. And since then, again, Israel's done things wrong, primarily missed opportunities, and primarily being too weak, not being tough enough with the Palestinians. Israel's been at war with the Palestinians since 1987, but certainly since the Second Intifada. It refuses to win that war. It refuses to bring the Palestinians to their knees or to defeat. And as a consequence, the Palestinians keep rising back. And the latest thing from Hamas, the latest horror from Hamas, is just them rising up again, expecting a meek, shallow response from the Israelis, and everything will go back to normal, and then they'll rise up again. And it just continues like that. Now, we could get into much more detail in any one of those things. But that is fundamentally in the key points, in principles. And look, from 1948 until today, Israel's built a country. So not just before that, but after. It's built, again, a relatively rights-respecting, a country that protects its civilians, a country where Arabs are free to live and live freely, make money, where their property rights are respected. Again, not perfectly, but pretty damn well. A country where there's free speech, including criticizing the government, including advocating for Palestinian rights. All of that. This is a conflict with clear, as much as you can in history, as much as you can in world affairs, clear good guys and clear bad guys. Clear good and clear evil. And the history bears it out. The factual history bears it out. Now, we warn you, there's a ton of revisionism. If you look at history from Wikipedia to all the networks to everybody else who present it, it is unbelievably biased. It is not historically accurate. It whitewashes what the Palestinians have done. It taints Israel in these horrible colors. If you look at the books that leftist academics, mainly academics or leftists, have written about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they're dramatically tilted towards the Palestinians. But the reality is, the facts are, that this is not some difficult conflict. This is about as clear as conflicts that last generations go in terms of who the good guys and who the bad guys are. And I challenge anybody to go and actually study and look at the facts and look at what happened and read up about it and really analyze it and come to a different conclusion. I doubt that anybody honest does that. And when you hear people like the left, like the New Right, and like the Libertarians argue otherwise, it's almost, some of it is ignorance, they just don't know, but most of it is just evil intent and evasion, which is also evil in and of itself. So either evasion or bad intent. And And that's why I don't have much tolerance for them. It's not like I need to educate them. If only I said these things in a calmer voice. If only I gave them a few more numbers. If I just gave them a few more dates. If I articulated this a little differently, they would get it. That is not the case. People to come to the kind of conclusions that I see people coming to, that Dave Smith came to, that so many others on Twitter and elsewhere are coming to, these are not good intentions. These are not good people, valid disagreements. These are not innocent people who don't really understand. These are people who are committed either to evading facts because they don't like them, or they're committed to presenting wrong facts in order to get their way, because their hatred is much more substantial. So you can pretend that somebody like Dave, oh, he's not as bad as Yaron presented him. If only Yaron would be calmer. If only he's presented it a little bit better, a little nicer. No, Dave is exactly what I said he was. And the arguments I made were exactly accurate. And listening just to half of his criticism of me just reinforced everything that I say. And by the way, when you equate America to the Soviet Union, you're basically saying America's worse. You're not raising the Soviet Union up, you're lowering the United States. Whenever the whole idea of multiculturalism, and I've accused this of the left, the whole idea of multiculturalism is not to raise up other cultures, it's to diminish your culture. It's to hate on your culture. It's not like the egalitarian left believes that Western civilization is just the same as African tribes. No, they think we are worse. They'll never say that, but that's the whole point of lowering it. Now, Dave might actually believe in some bizarre way that, oh, Palestinians and Israelis are the same. But no, what he really thinks, what the motivating to even saying that is that he hates Israel. Otherwise, you can't explain the obvious, unequivocal, perceptual level evidence and historical evidence and everything, reality, that shows that they're not equal. There has to be some motivation. And the motivation has to be negative. It has to be hatred. It's not like Dave Smith loves the Palestinians and therefore it's that he hates Israel and therefore finds what to evade and finds what to emphasize and finds in order to diminish it. And they do this exactly the same. This is why I call them America haters. They do exactly the same thing to America. They hate America. They're anti-American. That's why I called, Woods and all these guys anti-American, because they are. Because by diminishing America, they are purposefully, consciously evading all the things that make this country a great country. It's not a mistake. These people are not stupid. It requires, and the evidence is not subtle. This requires, just like it requires on the left, massive evasion. Scott, you would never say, oh, the left must be just mistaken. They're just mistaken. They don't get it. No. You have to judge people based on what they believe. You have to judge people based on the ideas that they hold. And if you condemn these kind of ideas on the left, then you must condemn these kind of ideas on the libertarian side. Now, anyway, everything I said, again, I repeat, everything I said about Dave, everything I said about the libertarians, I stand by. I watched half, I can't stomach the rest, half of Dave Smith's critique of what I said. It's bullshit. It's just bullshit. And again, he reaffirms in it, oh, I didn't say that Israel was just as bad as the Palestinians, as Hamas. I just said in the same statement that Hamas is evil, and Hamas did evil, and so does Israel. That doesn't equate them. It doesn't make them exactly the same. God, the stupidity of people. All right. Let's see. We don't need that. Remind everybody that the Ayn Rand Institute is a sponsor of this show. To get all the commentary that the Ayn Rand Institute is making on the Israel-Hamas war, go to aynrand.org/start here, and you'll get all that there. And please do so, and please support the Ayn Rand Institute any way you can. And thank you to the Ayn Rand Institute for supporting the Yaron Brook Show. All right, let's see what I want to do. So we've got, what did I do? Okay, we've got a lot of questions. I'm going to go over them. I'll start with John with $100. Thank you for the moral clarity you bring to this important issue. Thank you, John. Really appreciate the support and appreciate the comment. James says, commodities go up and down in wartime. Do you think oil and gas will keep fluctuating the next few years of finally stabilizing? Will the West, specifically Canada, US, Norway, start to drill and become less dependent on the Middle East and Russia? Look, the US today is a net exporter of oil, so it's not like we're dependent, but the oil market is a global market. If there's risk that Israel or the United States bomb the oil facilities of the Iranians, then oil is going to fluctuate because they're going to be worried, because even though there's an embargo on Iranian oil and on Russian oil, it doesn't matter because they are buyers. India buys, other countries buy, African countries might buy, South American countries might buy. And the point is that it's a global market. The price is set in a global market. And even though America produces more oil than it consumes, the prices are still going to fluctuate based on supply and demand in a global market. I think that supply and demand is going to continue to fluctuate, partially because a war is going to reduce global economic activity. If it reduces global economic activity, that will reduce demand for oil. At the same time, there's a real threat that if Iranian facilities get destroyed, the supply of oil will diminish, and that will cause prices to go up. But on the other hand, the Saudis might take advantage of the fact that we hit the Iranian facilities and increase the amount of oil that they produce. Look, by the time, will America be producing more oil in 5 years than we do today? Yes. I hope Canada and Norway do the same, although Norway, I just don't know. But certainly the United States will, because I think there's a lot of, they're not massively investing in oil production in the US, but there is investment going on. It is happening. So volatility is to be expected because you've got two unknowns, the demand side and the supply side, and their interaction creates complexity, and complexity and uncertainty create volatility. Armin, again, thanks for being here, $200. Thank you, Armin. We stand with Israel and the Jewish people. Thank you, Armin. Armin is originally from Iran, but he's an American now. Our heart especially goes out to the hostages and their families. I'm with you, Armin, and thank you. Really appreciate the support over these last few months. All right, some $20 questions. Catherine, thank you. Thanks so much for the inspiration and comfort at this time. I appreciate it, Catherine. Thank you. Jennifer, thank you, Ron, for being a voice of reason in a world gone mad. I appreciate that. Mary says, thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you to all of you guys for showing appreciation. It really means a lot to me. Brady, this conflict has made me stop calling myself a libertarian. Good. I was actually going to register as a delegate to the Libertarian Party before this, but their response to this has been too pathetic for me to do that. Remember, too, Ukraine. Let's not forget Ukraine and Russia and the Libertarians' response to Ukraine. It's all part of their anti-West, anti-American, anti-freedom. There's sympathies to Russia, there's sympathies to Hamas, there's sympathies to the Palestinians. Betray who and what they really are. Andrew, what do you think would happen if you said to a leftist or a libertarian point blank that he's a moral coward for equating Palestinians with Israel? I've said that on Twitter, at least. Would it shake him into the truth, or would he just continue to evade? He'd continue to evade. He'd be offended, and he'd argue, and he'd call me all the names that they're calling me on Twitter right now. So no, it wouldn't cause him. I can see it because I'm doing it all the time on Twitter. It doesn't cause them to question. I am inspired by Brady and others who I've seen who are leaving the Libertarian Party because of what the Libertarians are standing for. That is inspiring. Mark, thank you for the $100. Thanks for the history lesson. Helpful and good to see a consistency in good versus evil in this history. But I can go to Israel right now and have a good life. I can't go to any Islamic regime and have a good life. It is that simple. Yes, at the end of the day, it is that simple. And here I really, really encourage all of you to read Elon's book, What Justice Demands. And he shows exactly that, the fundamental key to understanding the difference between Israel and Palestine is observable in life today. You can go to the Palestinian Authority, you can go to Gaza Strip, where they've basically been autonomous, completely autonomous since 2006, and you can see what life is like there. For the Palestinians, how horrible it is, how awful it is. And you can go to Israel and you can live a life like you can in America or like you can in the West. And that is really, to a large extent, all you have to know. All you have to know. One is a Western free country. The other is the most authoritarian, repressive, horrible regimes, some of the worst on planet Earth. Who are you going to side with? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? It's just straightforward as that. Straightforward as that. And, you know, somebody says, and that's all you have to know. And if any of these guys who are critical of Israel were honest, then they'd admit that. But they won't. They can't. They can't. They hate the state. Israel's terrible. Israel doesn't respect property rights 100%. As I said, it taxes. I don't think that's an exaggeration. And yeah, maybe I could have made more subtle, more interesting, more level-headed, you know, more level kind of arguments without being so emotional, without taxes. But I call it like it is. And that's what it is. It's exactly that. And if you dig into Dave's argument, that's what you see. That's what you'll find. Lawrence says Dave Smith thinks that NATO provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Of course he does. Dave Smith thinks whatever Russia says, whatever Russian propaganda argues, he's going to buy into. And he's going to be ahistorical. He's never going to read what Putin actually writes. He's never going to dig into what Dugin stands for. He has no interest in understanding Russian philosophy. He has no interest because Ukraine is associated with Europe and European Union. They're evil, they're bad, they're a state. As I said, they tax, they don't protect our rights. And war is bad, and NATO is bad, and NATO is backed by the United States. Oh God, the United States, there it is again, fomenting war all over the world. Anywhere the United States touches is evil and disaster. And no, I don't hate the United States. I'm not anti-US, but the reality is that the United States always creates war and always creates disaster everywhere it goes. So its support of Ukraine must mean that Russia are the good guys. There you go. I mean, that's the logic. And if you dig down, you'll see, I'm making it into a caricature, but that's exactly how they think. They are so motivated, they are so obsessed with the anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Israeli, anti-state mentality that they will always side with evil against good. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe not always, but often and most of the time. All right, some reason this stopped working. Let me reload. Give me a second. I think that's working. Oh, I have to redo this one. Give me a second. This software wants me to restart stuff. Select all. Continue. All right, there we go. All right, Ian Mirkat says, I hear Israel is allowing water into Southern Gaza again. Incredibly sad. Glad I live in Poland. Furthermore, in my opinion, Gaza must be destroyed. Yeah, I talked about that the early part of the show. Supposedly they're allowing water into southern part of Gaza in order to encourage people in the north of Gaza to move there so they can flatten northern Gaza with minimal civilian casualties. Black Cat 997. Sorry if this was asked already. What are your thoughts on the unique relationship between the US and Qatar, given its close relationship with Iran, Hamas, etc.? We have a big military base and have been and seem to have political clout. They seem to have political clout. Yes, I mean, I spoke about that earlier. CENTCOM, the whole command of the Middle East is stationed in Qatar. We have a large Air Force base in Qatar. We staked billions and billions and billions of dollars in Qatar. They seem to have a lot of political power. They put a lot of money into lobbying in Washington. I think it's horrific. I think the United States should leave tomorrow. Forget the investment, blow it all up. Don't leave it like in Afghanistan for the bad guys to take. Qatar is an enemy of the United States. It is not a friend. It's not just about Iran, Hamas, but Qatar was explicitly funded ISIS at the same time as U.S. planes were taking off from the airfield in Qatar to bomb ISIS. So Qatar funded Al-Qaeda. Qatar is an explicit, unequivocal enemy of the United States. and the U.S. should have nothing, zero, zilch to do with them, and they should be labeled as an enemy of the United States, and the U.S. military should get out of there as quickly as possible. Andrew, is there one point about justice I wish the non-objectivist public media comprehended? If there's one point about justice I wish they comprehended, is that the dead Palestinians are Hamas's responsibility. What do you think the main intellectual blockage to their knowing that? Well, you know, they don't want to declare one side good and one side evil. They don't want to declare one side is starting the war, one side is responsible, and one side is not. They don't want to take sides. They want to have their moral equivalency. They don't want to make moral judgments. So if a Palestinian kills somebody, it's a Palestinian's fault. If an Israeli kills somebody, it's an Israeli fault. To hell with context. To hell with how it's done. To hell with self-defense. To hell with all of those. It's just simpler. It's more concrete. And it does not require them to do any kind of thoughtful analysis and judgment. And that's exactly what they're avoiding. What they're avoiding is moral judgment. We live in a culture of moral grayness. We live in a culture that rejects moral judgment. You know, even on this chat, you know, I'm supposed to be friends with my enemies. I'm supposed to be friends with people who are, you know, I consider to be, have opinions that constitute evil opinions. You know, to hell with moral judgment. Don't judge them. They're just mistaken. They're nice guys. Look, they're just making a mistake. You can't morally judge. We live in a culture, even among objectivists, where moral judgment is, and Ayn Rand would be flipping in her grave. A central thesis of objectivism, and she says this several times, is judge and be ready to be judged. Moral judgment is at the core of this philosophy. It's at the core of what justice requires. It's at the core of virtue. KFAX, Nikos' OCON talk on Israel posted a few days ago already has 80,000 plus views. That's big. I hope it reaches the right audience. I appreciate what you and AOI are doing. Yes, it is big, and you know, the timing of that talk was perfect, and he gave a good talk, and I'm glad it's getting as much visibility as it does. By the way, if you want to help that, then share it, like it, do all that stuff. Also, I have a lot of talks on Israel going back a long time. If you just Google or YouTube or search on YouTube, Yaron Brook Israel, you could find I've got a talk I think really interesting and worthwhile watching. Is a talk I gave in 2003 in the midst of the second intifada at the University of Pennsylvania at UPenn, which was shown at the time on C-SPAN and is available on the C-SPAN website. And it would be really, really, really cool if right now that spiked on C-SPAN, not on my channel, on C-SPAN's channel. And if that spiked in interest. It was done in 2003. I say some really controversial things. In the Q&A, I actually say, if somebody asks me what should be done with Yasser Arafat, I say Israel should find the tallest tree and hang him. This is in 2003. I think I was wearing a bulletproof vest when I said it. But that is a talk that should be, should be a, it should be a talk that is watched right now because it's as relevant today as it was back then. Oh, whoops. Thomas says, appreciate your work and always on point, clear reasoning. Why are the other 19 Arab countries not interested in refugees from Gaza? Well, because the Palestinians have not been, particularly militant Palestinians, have not been positive contributors to the local economies. And look, but the ultimate reason, because Palestinians can be just as productive as anybody, and if most of the Palestinians, if they were accepted into these other 19 countries, would become productive citizens of those countries. The reality is that the Arab countries want the Palestinians to be in refugee camps, want them to be in, quote, crisis, as a weapon against Israel, as a weapon against the West, as guilt against the West. And it's always been that way. Why is the refugee camps in Lebanon? This is now since 1970, right? So what is it, 50 years, 53 years. And those people have not been settled. They still don't have Lebanese citizenship. They're still treated as third-class citizens. They're still not allowed to emigrate to other Arab countries. This is not Israel preventing them. This is Lebanon and other Arab countries doing this. Why? Because they want to keep them as a symbol of of evil Israelis as a weapon of guilt against the West. That's the fundamental reason. Yeah, the talk is called US-Israel Relations on C-SPAN. So just look, Israel Relations, Yaron Brook, C-SPAN, and you'll find it. Highly recommend it. I think it's good. All right, Catherine says, happy birthday, Leonard Peikoff. Yes, today is Leonard Peikoff's not just any birthday, 90. That's huge, huge. Scott says, I appreciate Rand's identified that some people hate the good for being the good, but did you maybe use that slightly too casually at Dave Smith Norton? No. I consider the whole wing of the Libertarian Party that's affiliated with the Mises Institute, which should be called the Rothbard Institute, to be haters of the good for being the good. You know, there are a few economists maybe who they're just economists, and Auburn is the best place for them to do their work and stuff, and they don't get involved in all this other crap that are not part of that. But the people who support and the intellectuals who are actively involved in cultural commentary that come out of the von Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, are bad. They are haters of the good for being the good, and I'll stand by that. I don't think that was too dramatic. Again, I think they are better. ANCAPs, I debated, what's his name? Brian Kaplan. I would not debate Smith. I would not debate anybody affiliated with the Mises Institute. I mentioned the other day that Randy Barnett, who is, I think considers himself an ANCAP, is very good on this Israel issue and is generally a brilliant legal scholar. And there are many libertarians in Cato who are really good people and good on the issues and good on some issues. I might disagree with some issues, but generally issues. But the Mises Institute, forget about it. Anybody affiliated with them, forget it. Again, I mean, there might be some economists affiliated with them because it's the only organization they could be affiliated with. But the people making cultural commentary out of the Mises Institute, literally forget about them. And that is, the standard is human life. And whether it's pro-life or anti-life, and they are clearly anti-life. Alma and moral relativism, everything you have to complain about the left, the far left, is true of those kind of libertarians. When will the IDF get on with it? I'm not a spokesman for the IDF. I have no idea. They should have already. Stephen Harper says, Alma Deutscher, who had dedicated the second movement of a 2017 piano concerto to the deceased Israeli grandmother, has posted a rededicated to the Israeli victims of Hamas on YouTube. Good for Alma Deutscher. I mean, she's a romantic, not just in her music, but I think in her spirit as well. So good for Alma. Dennis says, how much knowledge does IDF have of the area in Gaza, especially with regard to tunnels and the detection of people like hostages? What is the technology they use for that? They use some kind of sonar technology that penetrates the ground and figures out where tunnels might exist. But it's very difficult with 500 kilometers of tunnels. They have intelligence, but that obviously has failed. They have people in Gaza. They have special forces that have entered and exited and might have some knowledge. They have knowledge, but it's far from complete. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be hard. It's going to be super difficult. Knowledge, so they've mapped it out from the sky using some kind of sonar technology. They've mapped it out with special forces to the extent that they can. And they've got spies inside. Palestinians are working for Israel. But that obviously failed in a big scale by not, letting Israel know about the coming attack. So hard to tell, not great. Michael, libertarians and ANCAPs seem to be more and more threatened by your online presence. This is great. You're probably bringing a lot of libertarians over to objectivism. I don't know if I am, but maybe over to sanity. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if any libertarians is converted because of me, maybe. How is Hamas able to make tens of thousands of rockets without Israel's spy planes seeing it? No, I mean, everybody knew that they were making the rockets. Now, spy planes can't see what happens inside. Spy planes certainly can't see what happens inside tunnels. As I posted on Twitter a video of the Hamas taking apart water pipes that deliver water to their own citizens, and turning them into rockets. That's very hard to see, particularly if they build a kind of some barrier so you can't see it from the sky, and it just looks like they're doing construction work. Very, very easy to build rockets, but Israel knew that they had thousands of rockets. Maybe they're surprised by exactly how many, but they knew. Hezbollah has 140,000 at least, and Israel knows that. But a lot of it is homemade, a lot of it is built in tunnels, and Israel doesn't have visibility into those tunnels from the air. Friend of Aristotle, I can't make it often, but I'm never disappointed. Thanks, Yaron. Appreciate it. Thank you. Always glad to have a friend of Aristotle's on board. Ray Dalio, James says, Ray Dalio mentioned because of the war in Israel that a world war is possible. Do you think any Muslim country will attempt to attack Israel right now? Do you think we are headed towards a world war? No, I don't think we're heading towards a world war. The only elements that can create a world war are Russia and China. Russia is not interested in engaging directly with the West. It's had a hard enough time with Ukraine, and so I don't expect that. China, you might think that China would. This would be a good opportunity for China to invade Taiwan because the United States is busy with Ukraine and with Israel, and maybe it is. I mean, I'm not in a position to predict what the Chinese will do. But the Chinese are very wary of invading Taiwan, partially because I think the Taiwanese are ready, or at least decently ready. The US has a real presence in the Pacific, and I just don't see the Chinese military ready to take on a mission like that. I think military estimates in the United States have it as it's going to take China at least 5 years to get ready for such an invasion. But they could be wrong, right? They could be very wrong. So I hope that's not the case, but if you're going to get a world war, it's going to come from China invading Taiwan, not from anybody caring too much about Hamas or even caring that much about Iran. So you definitely see Iran involved in this, but is Russia going to come to the defense of Iran and risk a conventional war with the United States? I don't think so. I don't think so. Michael, does evil want to die? Do evil people want someone to kill them? No, well, deep down, in a sense, it's all anti-life, and they're anti-life, including their own. But it's not a want. It's not a desire to die. It's not like they're thinking about it. But yeah, deep down, if you take what they hold consistently, sure. At what point do you write someone off as a human being? Well, at the point of morality. If they're immoral, and they're consistently immoral, with no repent, you write them off. Duncan Curry says, I stand with Israel and I stand with Yaron Brook. Thank you, Duncan. Really, really appreciate it. And we'll have you. I'm really eager to hear stories from showing We the Living in Ukraine. That must have been quite an experience. I followed it a little bit on social media, but that was courageous, and I salute you for doing that. That's pretty amazing. Andrew, would a rational American government downplay the Iranian connection to Hamas? No, quite the contrary. They would overplay it, and they would use this as another opportunity to take out the Iranians finally. Michael says, do you think a sizable number of people can't wait to give their freedom away? Why is this? Look, the natural state of humanity, if you will, has been lack of freedom. Freedom is an achievement. Freedom requires effort. Freedom requires thinking. Freedom requires taking personal responsibility. And when people lose that motivation, when they lose the willingness and ability, or the willingness and the intellectual motivation to engage in that activity, to embrace that personal responsibility, then it's easier for them to embrace somebody else telling them what to do and how to do it. To live free requires energy, requires effort, requires engagement, requires commitment, requires courage. And as the Enlightenment values dissipate, people return to a pre-Enlightenment state where they're not that interested in freedom. They want to be told what to do. It's easier, it's safer. Do we simply not have the numbers to make any significant change in the world? Yep, we don't have the numbers. Michael says, other than Germany, is there any other country touched by the Enlightenment that collapsed into fascism? Italy? Russia, you could argue, was touched by the Enlightenment. I don't know, other parts of Europe that embraced fascism during, or supported Hitler during different parts of time. South America was touched by the Enlightenment, certainly in the 19th century, and yet embraced fascism during the 20th century. So yes, lots of countries. Michael says, Biden's speech on Israel was shockingly good for a Democrat. Does he just not want to lose the Jewish vote before the election? No, I mean, I think the left has been pro-Israel for a variety of reasons, including the Jewish vote, but they know Israel, they've been to Israel, they understand Israel to some extent. And the old Democrats were much more pro-Israel than Republicans. And I think Biden is still a legacy of that. The party is slowly being taken over by the AOCs of the world, who are violently anti-Israel. And that is the future of the Democratic Party. But the past of the Democratic Party was mostly pro-Israel, Jimmy Carter being an exception, although as president he was fairly pro-Israel. But later on became very anti-Israel as an ex-president. Michael says, I think there's a strong element of egoism in Israel despite the altruism in the intellectuals. The Israeli people have pride in their nation and want to survive and not be pushed around. Yes, I mean, it's very similar to the American sense of life, very similar to American sense of pride and self-interest. Michael says, those pro-Palestinian protesters are not protests at all. They are, what are they protesting? They are celebrating barbarians being able to operate. Yes, definitely. Michael says, evil needs to be wiped out. It should not be happening in this day and age. Absolutely. But you're seeing it in Ukraine and in Gaza. Frank says, on Bible maps in Gaza, the home of the Philistines. I think so. I think Gaza is basically the home of the Philistines. This is where the Philistines is Goliath. David fought Goliath. It was the Israelites fighting the Philistines. And the area of Gaza is generally considered historically to be the area where the Philistines live. Not just that area, but part of that area. At least that's my understanding. I'm not an expert on that. Michael says, is support for Israel larger than you expected? No, and it'll dissipate. If it sustains itself, it'll be larger than expected, but it'll dissipate, sadly. Wow, okay, good. Still got a lot of questions. If your philosophy is against reason, against living life, then you or your society are going to become murderous. Ultimately, I think violence is always the consequence of being against reason. Reason is a bulwark against violence, a respect for reason. There's no accident that the Enlightenment led to the least violent period in history, the least violent periods in history, post-Napoleonic Wars and post-World War II. Respect for science, technology, and reason. Michael says, the Israeli government is reversing their strict gun control policy. Good, finally. Evidence that having an armed and trained civilian is rational value for a free country. Yeah, particularly if your enemy is right there and can just walk right into your homes, somebody needs to be able to stop them. Do we all have irrational elements no matter how good and objective someone is? We don't have to have. I think we all do because of the way we were brought up and the fact that we live in such an irrational society that it's just the effort required to overcome both our training and just everything around us is high, so most of us do, yes. Alex, Ilan's book has been very insightful. Thank you for sharing. Absolutely, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Read Ilan Jono's book, What Justice Demands. Please buy it. It's available in softback. They just did a reprinting of it. So please buy it. Show the publisher that there's a real market for this. Michael says, war is a symptom of man's failure as a thinking animal. Some men's, not man's, some men's. Michael, the left are masters of empowering empty words like apartheid and genocide. Well, they're not empty words, they're meaningful words. They're good at empowering those words with a meaning that is different than their original meaning, than their intended meaning. Churning them into cultish mantra that gives their minions some feeling of invincibility against logic and reason. Yeah, they're very good at creating package deals. And that's what they do. They create package deals. Michael, everyone is for free speech until they are extremely uncomfortable. Well, some people are not for free speech even before that, unfortunately. Justice says, does Bibi have a political future? I hope not. I really, 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 I've been anti-Bibi for 20 years. I'm one of the few people out there who've been anti-Bibi for 20 years, who respects what he says and what he writes, but doesn't respect at all what he does. I don't think he has a political future. I don't think Israel will forgive him. Enric says, this is excellent. Thank you for the Middle East history. Look forward to the clip. Yeah, don't forget, Action Jackson, to turn the history section into a clip. Andrew, there's a dearth of patents and Nobel Prizes coming from Palestinian territory and a plethora of them coming from Israel. How would you respond to those who would say that's because of occupation? Well, partially, you don't have to just look at the Palestinian Authority. How many Nobel Prizes have come out of the Arab world, of the Muslim world, expanded to the Muslim world? Include Pakistan and Afghanistan, include even Malaysia and Indonesia, include Saudi Arabia and Libya and Morocco and Iran, Iraq and Iran. How many Nobel Prizes have come out of there? So, those countries are not occupied. So there's something about modern Islam. There's something about the way Islam is practiced today. There's something about the political regimes that Muslim countries have adopted. And there's something about the ideology and the lack of separation of state from church in these regimes that creates a horrible culture that is antithetical to the production of Nobel Prizes in the sciences, at least. I'm sure they got some. Yasser Arafat ultimately got a Nobel Prize for peace, so he did get one Nobel Prize, right? Apollo Zeus asks what my favorite animal is. Lions. Michael Sanders, would you be a fool not to own a firearm in today's world? Well, if that's the case, then I'm a fool. I don't own a firearm in today's world. I just don't feel afraid enough to own a firearm, and I don't like firearms. And I take owning a firearm pretty seriously. And if you own a firearm, you should practice regularly. You should train. You should know how to use it really well. And I just don't find, I don't enjoy it particularly, and I don't find the time for it. So I owned a firearm in California, and I never took it out. I never went to train, and I feel irresponsible for having it and not training on it. Now I could change my mind. Things could be different, and I might. I'm not against owning a firearm. I think a defensive weapon of some sort. Ultimately, maybe a shotgun is the easiest because you don't have to train on it. You just point and click the button and press the trigger. So maybe something like a shotgun. It's always in the back of my mind in Puerto Rico. I haven't done it. I might do it. I don't know. Josh says, that comment from the talk about hanging from the tallest tree needs to be a short. Yeah, I mean, feel free to do it. It's a C-SPAN video. Anybody can go in there, cut it, and put it up. So feel free to take any of my videos, turn them into shorts, and get them out there. Daniel says, you have converted me, Yaron, from a socialist to a student of objectivism. I appreciate that. I'm wondering if I've converted any libertarians, particularly over this issue. It would be interesting. Do you think, Mark says, do you think Representative Tlaib has the right to fly the Palestinian flag outside of her office in Congress? If not, what should be done? No, I don't think she has. I think it should be clear that congressmen should not be flying anybody's flags outside their offices, but particularly not a flag of an entity that is hostile to the United States. But look, this is all the fault of Bush, the fault of every president since Bush. If the United States declared Hamas an enemy of the United States, then it would be obvious that she couldn't fly the flag. But the United States still pretends and gives aid, and has given aid under many administrations, to Hamas and the Palestinians. So as long as that's the case, how can you blame her? So, I mean, you can't blame her, of course, but the United States should declare war or declare Islamic totalitarianism as an enemy and make a list of all the organizations and all the state actors that facilitate Islamic totalitarianism. Qatar would probably be on that list, so would Iran. And they war with them as well. And then it's obvious that you ban their flags and you ban any show of, by an American congressman, any show of sympathy towards the enemy. But that's not going to happen. America's not going to do that. Proper. What context is it okay to settle on unused land and start a nation? I'm guessing you wouldn't be okay with people taking over empty and unowned parts of Montana and establishing their own nation. I would. I would if there wasn't a United States here already. But remember, there was no nation there. There was an empire, and they didn't start a nation during the empire. They started a nation once the empire left. The British Empire left. And so there was nothing there. There was nobody there. There was no there was no political entity responsible for this piece of land. And you live on this land. And you've developed this land. You've built this land. You've created everything there. Of course, you're going to declare your own independence over it. So it's not like there was another political entity controlling and part of it. Now, by the way, I do believe that all unused territory in the United States should be settled. And I don't care by whom, by immigrants, for all I care. The United States should basically have what do you call it? What did they do in Oklahoma Territory? And allow people to settle all land owned by the government. There should be no land owned by the government, which is unused. But it's not equivalent. There is a rule of law over the land in Montana, whether it's used or unused. There was no rule of law. There was no nation. There was no country ruling what became Israel. There was a British had taken it from the Ottomans. The Ottomans had taken it from previous Muslim empires. The previous Muslim empires took it from the Byzantines. The Byzantines took it from the Romans. And the Romans took it from the Jews. So how far back do we need to go? The Jews took it from the Philistines in the Old Testament. So how far do we need to go? Find a few Philistines and say it's yours? No, the British left, creating a vacuum. Israel declared independence. It was invaded. It defended itself. It occupied the land that it occupied. Again, that's why I did the history, to make it clear that it wasn't like there was a Palestinian country, a Palestinian nation ruled by Palestinians, and the Israelis came in, they occupied some land and said, whoops, we wanted our own country. Although libertarians should be happy about that. They claim that you should be able to secede. Any plot of land should be able to secede. I'm not. But there was no Palestinian state. There was no Palestinian country. And by the way, if it had been an authoritarian state, and you want to secede in the name of liberty and freedom, then yeah, absolutely you have a right to do that and should do that. So if Montana was ruled by an authoritarian and somebody came in and settled the unused land and declared a new country in the unused land that celebrated liberty and freedom, yes, I would support that, absolutely. So context really, really matters. Equal to Reality says, I am a former ANCAP libertarian, now objectivist thanks to you. I have been an objectivist for 4 or 5 years now. Excellent. Thank you, Equal to Reality. I'm hoping there are more like you out there and that we, as we speak, are converting more ANCAPs to objectivism daily, hourly, minutely. All right, everybody. Thank you for all the support, both spiritual, financial, just watching. Again, please look at this video, all the videos I've done, the old videos on 9/11, on just war theory, morality of war, all of those, if you look at YouTube, Morality of War, Yaron Brook, share all those videos, like all those videos, pump those videos ranking up. This is the time for those videos to be seen. Go to Nikos' video, share that. Go to Ilan and Ankar's video, share that. Get these ideas out there. This is the time. We're at war, intellectual war, in the case of those of us on this show, but we are at war, so let's fight. I mean, this is a time to fight. This is not a time to be passive. This is a time to be active. All right, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. I will see you all probably tomorrow. I'll do a short show tomorrow, but it will be a short show, like 45 minutes, just to give you any updates that might be happening.